Cabin Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. Batista with a drive. Deep left field. No doubt about it. Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Whole lot of NHL on tonight's show, Mike. How you doing tonight?
Good, man. How are you?
Not too bad. You feeling like talking some puck?
Yeah.
All right.
Lots to digest.
That's exactly what we are going to do. We're going to check in with Ollie as well, who is down in Red Deer still with Team NT covering the Canada Winter Games. Bring in update on how Team NT is doing. All that and more as Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Cabin Sports Radio.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. The trade deadline in the NHL has come and gone today, and you never quite know how it's going to go. But luckily, it was actually a very eventful trade deadline day, and thus has given us plenty to talk about today.
Yeah, I felt pretty good for all the guys on the TSN Trade Deadline show. Sportsnet has a feature now where they have these guys doing like 8 straight hours of programming. They had enough to talk about. For the longest time today, it was the Hayes move to Winnipeg, because that dropped a little bit earlier. I'm always catch myself watching the ticker, because it's usually, I believe the NBA is the same as well, 1 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Eastern time.
Right.
So 1 o'clock Mountain time when I find myself tuning in. And oftentimes, some of them will come in after the fact. As long as
flood in,
right,
yeah.
As long as the call is made to the league before the cutoff time, I think they still fax. I don't know who faxes anymore.
Probably
Anyways,
not too many.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. Lou Lamoriello's not, maybe
date.
Lou, but I can't see how many else. Let's start with the Canadian teams. Like you mentioned, we may as well start in Winnipeg. Why not? They made a big move, bringing in Kevin Hayes from the New York Rangers to shore up their center depth, essentially. Kind of what they were sniffing around for. They were looking for a top 6 forward. I think they got kind of what they were looking for in Kevin Hayes. He kind of fits the team description a bit. I'm not necessarily sure they were looking to get bigger and tougher. I'm not sure that was necessarily something that Winnipeg was in dire need of going into this trade deadline. But I mean, I think he's going to fit right in. I think you give up a bit on the skill side that you had with Paul Stastny when they brought him in last year. But obviously you gain a little bit more size and a bit more grit over Paul Stastny with a Kevin Hayes. They gave up Brendan Lemieux, a 2019 first-round pick, and a conditional fourth-round pick, which will go to New York if the Jets happen to win the Stanley Cup. I thought it was a little on the steep side, giving up Lemieux. I really like the potential he's shown this year, and I do think he will become a pretty steady roster guy. But it's a guy who is not there yet, and he might only ever be a depth forward. So if you can flip him to bring in a guy who you think is going to have a more immediate punch, then that is obviously what they did here. And I mean, I'm not too upset about it. I think the Jets made a good move there.
I think a lot of the pundits are calling this a home run for the Jets. We knew them and 5 other teams, real legitimate Stanley Cup contenders, were going to make plays today. So we figured they were in on some of the big fish. Kevin Hayes' name was out there for a long time. You got to feel for Henrik Lundqvist. I'm sure you saw that video of him crying just before the weekend after his good friend Matt Zuccarello was also shipped off. New York is a team that's not going anywhere this year, so they're going to start stripping some parts. But the early returns anyways, what the pundits are saying, this seems like a nice fit, a nice pickup for the Winnipeg Jets. General manager Kevin Cheveldayoff said the first-round pick would be up for grabs. We knew that was in play. Yeah. And they do use that as a means of securing Kevin Hayes from New York. Maybe he can even crack the top six, slide him into that second line, maybe centering Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers. That's been thrown around. Big guy, 6'5", 215. Like you said, they didn't really need to get all that bigger. And compared to someone like Stastny last year, who was a great pickup for their Stanley Cup playoff run, are given a little back in the skill department. But 42 points on the season. He should slide in pretty nice.
He's having a career year this year, which is nice that you get a guy who is coming in hot and, having a really good season. So that's a nice addition to this trade. They also made a couple moves just adding to their depth elsewhere. They picked up Nathan Beaulieu from the Buffalo Sabres, who, he's a guy who could come in handy down the stretch, especially now that Dustin Byfuglien is going to be out for some extended time. They probably were a bit concerned about their top six, making sure that you've got legit top six guys in there. They've got a young kid who's his name escapes me at the moment. Young guy on defense who's looked really well. He's filled in. He's one of the draft picks, and his name is just escaping me right now. He's played really well, but it's when you're going into the playoffs and you're hoping to make a deep run, you got to make sure you've got a good at least seventh guy who's waiting in the wings and can jump in and not really miss a step at any point. And I think they probably have that in Nathan Beaulieu now. So that was a decent pickup as well. And bringing Matt Hendricks back.
That's right.
Yeah, good locker room guy. And again, just adding a bit more toughness and a bit more depth, a bit more veteran leadership and presence. If you're playing, when you're playing Nashville or maybe St. Louis, who knows? These are going to be physical series. So, a guy like Matt Hendricks in the lineup could prove to be invaluable down the stretch.
It's interesting you mentioned St. Louis. Just looking, we're 20 games out now, but looking at the playoff picture, what it could translate into in the coming weeks, it's going to be an absolute dogfight at the top of that Central Division. I'm sure we'll touch on Nashville later, who made a couple big plays as part of the trade deadline day. They're going to be neck and neck at the top of the Central. We figured at the beginning of the season that would probably be the case, but If Winnipeg does secure that top spot, even you're looking at a pretty tough first round matchup, let alone you figure they'd advance. You'd like to think that anyways. And they're going to, it was a 7-game series last year. They didn't have home ice and ended up coming out on top before being eliminated by the Knights. But even if you have, a St. Louis, I don't know how close Dallas is, but one of those teams slide in, another Central Division foe, slide into one of those last spots. That's a tough call for the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, so, it could still be Dallas in that last wild card spot. There really is quite a few variables that it could end up being right now. As of right now, Dallas sits in that final the Central Division wild card spot. It's so hard to describe now the way the divisions. I think it's cool that the NHL gets to say wild card now. Right, yeah. You always, I always envied that about baseball. I was like, that sounds cool, the wild card race. And now NFL they actually have that. It's hard to describe it. I'm still trying to, a few years later on, still trying to wrap my head around that. But yes, as of right now, the Dallas Stars sitting in that last wild card spot. So that
who are also busy this trade deadline. You have the top 6 teams in the Western Conference were all pretty busy today. So it's just going to get more and more competitive as these final 20 games play out. And we are in for some exciting playoff hockey in that Western Conference. So we knew the Jets were going to make some play, and it seems like they made a pretty good one. Yeah, and lastly on the Winnipeg Jets, kind of the last move, or one of those ones you were talking about earlier that just kind of filter in after the actual deadline has passed. They traded they've traded Nick Petan to the Toronto Maple Leafs and got Par Lindholm in exchange, which for the Jets, not a bad move either. It's obviously, I think the Leafs, Jay Bear and I were talking before the show off the air. I think for the Leafs, it's basically they just don't feel like they have the room for a guy like Par Lindholm. He's going to be one of these potential casualties next year anyway. Yeah. And I think they've got a few guys kind of within the Marlies system, and they're like just not quite finding their way into the lineup. And Trevor Moore was one that Jay specifically
specifically pointed out, who I think that the Leafs want to see what they have with him.
Right.
They want to give him a bit more of a window to demonstrate what he can bring to this team for now and for the future. So making a bit of room for him by sending Par Lindholm to the Jets. And could be a great pickup for the Jets, too. Another, depth guy who has really proven his worth with the Leafs this year. He's been great on the penalty kill, great as a fourth-line center. Can provide, maybe some secondary scoring here and there. But but you don't obviously give up anything sending Nick Petan because he was not part of the major club picture.
Right.
So not a bad last little move for the Jets. So yeah, they were pretty active, and everyone expected them to be. So we will see how that all pans out for them. Heading to let's go east. Let's head over to Ottawa. Montreal didn't do a whole lot.
No.
I think they made a couple little depth moves here and there. Yeah, picked up Jordan Wheel. Other than that, Ottawa, definitely, I think the most
Probably the busiest
active
team in the entire NHL.
Yeah. Quite a few moves, obviously starting off with this past Friday, making the Matt Duchene deal, pulling the trigger on that one after so many months of speculation.
Yeah, Matt Duchene, Mark Stone, we've heard their names for months now, going all the way back to the start of this season. It's crazy to think that this is a club that's not even that far removed from a period of serious contention. Was it 2016? I think they were one game away from going to the Stanley Cup final.
Yep.
Ended up getting bumped by the Penguins, who went on to beat the Sharks. And things were looking pretty good. In the nation's capital. Such has not been the case the past.
How quickly things change.
The past couple seasons, anyways. We know what the plan is. Dorian came out saying it earlier. Melnick came out saying it earlier. They're going to spend close to the cap 3 seasons from now. 2 seasons from now for a period of solid contention for 3-4 seasons. So the writing was on the wall. We figured Duchene would go. That news came around on Friday to a team that really emerged as a team that is going all in.
Oh, my God.
And they turned things around really quick. We were talking about the Columbus Blue Jackets a couple weeks ago, or a team that got hot right around the time of year that you got to make some serious decisions if you're in management.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they went from, okay, are we selling not only Artemi Panarin, but also Sergei Bobrovsky, to, oh my goodness, we're going to pick up Matt Duchene. Probably, I mean, now that Panarin ultimately was not dealt, you'd put Duchene on the same pedestal as you would put Mark Stone as the crown jewel of this trade deadline class.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they were able to secure him, giving up 2 first-round picks and some spare parts. But Matt Duchene's tenure in Ottawa is now over.
And I like it for the Columbus Blue Jackets. What a bold curveball!
It's a great
to
story.
Throw at everybody.
Yeah,
and I mean, you look at the standings as they are right now. They are still far from a sure thing to be in this year's NHL playoffs. They're sitting right now in 3rd place in the Metropolitan Division. They've got both the Carolina Hurricanes and the Pittsburgh Penguins nipping at their heels, just 1 point behind. So they may slide into that last wild card spot. They may hold steady in 3rd place, or they may slide right out of the playoff picture altogether, because it's pretty much the same. They're tied with the Montreal Canadiens if they wanted to potentially cross over into the Atlantic Division wild card spot. Montreal Canadiens are sitting at 73 points as well. So the Blue Jackets are still in tough, and they've been kind of in this spot where it's like you have to decide,
right?
Are we going to buy? Are we all in? Or are we going to sell because we don't think that this is a sure enough bet and we've got these guys that we're going to lose for nothing otherwise? You know what? You gotta applaud the boldness of the direction they went, because not only did they just be like, let's just see how it goes. Let's just stay quiet and kind of push forward with what we got. No, they doubled down and made some huge moves, like you say, bringing in Matt Duchene and some other pretty big picks too. They picked up Adam McQuaid from the New York Rangers. He was one that the Leafs, among other teams, were targeting as someone to kind of shore up their toughness on defense. And I feel like they made another move.
Yeah, they weren't
too.
even done with Ottawa. They got back on the phone.
That's right.
With Eugene Melnyk. We'll take Dzingel too.
Yeah.
44 points, 22 goals, 22 assists on the season. And I mean, Ottawa, up until late last week, we're scratching pretty much half of their roster heading into their weekend games. So CC was, I guess, one of the bigger names. We didn't see switch teams, but Dzingel, Mark Stone, who we'll get to later, Matt Duchene, two of them end up going to the Columbus Blue Jackets. It's a good story, right? Like a small market NHL franchise in Ohio, right? And they emerge as the team, like the clear-cut winner of NHL Trade Deadline Day. And then Kincaid, too, from the New Jersey Devils. So they get that. I mean, it's an insurance move, I suppose.
Absolutely.
With Sergei Bobrovsky's impending unrestricted free agency, I believe. They're not even restricted free agents, him and Panarin at the end of the season. So, I mean, if he ends up walking, which it's kind of looking like will be the case, but who knows, though, depending on what we've seen today and over the weekend, if they make a serious run at things, winning changes people's minds. What does that do for Panarin and Bobrovsky, country mates who like to play together, have said they want to play together going forward? If they make a run at this thing, who knows?
Apparently, Artemi Panarin's nervous laughter when asked if there was a possibility he could resign, not enough to dissuade the Columbus Blue Jackets from sticking with him and pushing forward. But getting back to the Ottawa Senators, obviously, yes, they were obvious sellers, the biggest sellers, and like you said, probably the most active team at this year's NHL trade deadline. There were a few people who were calling them the major losers on the day, but when you really add it up, I was kind of looking at all the return they got. They picked up Anthony Duclair in, and I believe that was in the Dzingel, one of the deals with Columbus. They picked up, Anthony Duclair, and he's one of these guys where you hear the name, and it's just, you think, oh, he's almost an elite guy.
Yeah.
And then you look at his stats, and it's like, oh, no, he's far from an elite guy. He's got so much potential, and if he can find any of that potential in Ottawa, I think they may have picked up a gem in Anthony Duclair. He's kind of establishing himself now as one of those guys who he comes busting out of the gate at the start of the season, puts on a few highlight reel goals, wins the 1v1 on SportsCenter for a couple weeks in a row, and then it's like he just falls asleep for the rest of the season.
One of those rare guys where maybe a change of scenery is all that it takes. You never know. But he never really has lived quite up to that full potential that was expected of him.
Rookie year had a fantastic year, and ever since then, it's like he's been trying to find his game again.
Yeah. So maybe a change of scenery in the nation's capital. Who knows what it can do? So they picked up
Anthony Duclair and a few other prospects, including Eric Brandstrom, who people are raving about, Oscar Lindberg, Vitaly Abramov, Jonathan Davidson, 3 second-round picks, 2 first-round picks, one this year and one in 2020. And this is all in exchange for 2 players that they knew were good as gone. And then Ryan Dzingel, who, in my opinion, Ryan Dzingel's a fine player, but he's not a Matt Duchene. He's not a Mark Stone. He's not necessarily a cornerstone guy. He's a good addition to any team. He's going to make any team a bit better. But I do think he's one of these guys that, and you see it every year, his worth is being inflated a bit by the trade deadline. People knew they could get him. They wanted to make additions to their team. They gave up a bit more to get him. I think the Senators kind of came out of this looking really good. All things considered, you know?
And we'll get to Mark Stone, who once we know now that Artemi Panarin was not dealt. So as soon as people started to realize after the Duchene trade that the Blue Jackets were going to try to make a run at this thing, I think most people probably figured that Panarin was suddenly off the table. They're going to make a run with this squad. So then you got Mark Stone, who would naturally become the next crown jewel of this trade deadline class. Him and Duchene, Wayne Simmons, Kevin Hayes, those crop of guys who we figured were on their way out.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of what people are saying when they're putting the Ottawa Senators, in this class of losers, per se. It's just tough for me, given we knew this was going to happen.
Absolutely.
We knew the Ottawa Senators were not going to be a competitive team, and they were going to sell come trade deadline. I think the criticism largely is that they didn't get a first-round pick back as part of the Stone trade.
Right.
But like you said, there's Eric Brandstrom, who is very highly regarded, amongst the best defensive prospects not to be playing in the NHL right now. People rave about him, very high on him. And you got the 2 first-rounders as part of the Columbus deal, so it's not like you're sitting without picks.
I certainly don't think I don't feel like they got fleeced.
No.
I'll put it that way. For the guys that they gave up, obviously 3 really good hockey players. But again, you knew pretty much for the majority of this season that they were not players that were going to be looking to re-sign, or maybe not that they were not going to be looking to re-sign in Ottawa, but that Eugene Melnyk and the Ottawa Senators ownership group, they weren't in the plans. Mm-hmm. I think they kind of they almost pretended for a while as though they were, I don't know, to, maybe try and just buy as much time as they could to talk to their agents and potentially change their minds. But it's been so long now that these guys have been talked about as, when this happens, when the trade deadline comes, they're gone. Mm-hmm. And there was just no real question about it. So when you're kind of put in the corner like that, you got to get what you can for them. And all things considered, I think the Senators did pretty well.
Yeah. You feel bad for Ottawa fans. The next couple seasons, you might not be watching too much good hockey.
Yeah, 5 draft picks are not exactly fun to watch.
No,
but
you have to hope that things will turn around in the nation's capital. The writing was on the wall. Everyone in the organization, I'm sure even fans, were expecting this, and it's happened now. So you got to move on. We are in a full-blown rebuild in Ottawa.
Yep.
And let's hope they can field a competitive team in a couple years.
The dreaded R word.
Oh, yeah.
All right. We will be back with much more NHL Trade Deadline recap and talk because, well, that's just what's going on today. So I hope you are ready to talk some puck. But first, when we're back, we are going to head down to Red Deer and talk to Mr. Ollie Williams, who's going to give us an update. Team NT Canada Winter Games. That's next on Cabin Sports Radio.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Ollie Williams is still down with Team NT in Red Deer for the Canada Winter Games, following along and reporting on everything Team NT. SportNorth.com if you want to follow that, cabinradio.ca as well, or you can check out the Team NT Facebook page. They are posting everything that happens on there. And we go to Ollie now.
Yeah, hello, Scott. Welcome to the Canada Winter Games. I am in the Gary W. Harris Recreation Centre right now, the most glamorously named recreation centre in Canada, where I could look over to my left and find badminton going on. Across the other side of this centre, there is the ice rink, and that's got figure skating right now. And I am right in front of squash, where I'm watching Team NT's women taking on Alberta in the team event, which, as you can probably imagine, is proving a little bit of a tough encounter, but they've got a great team ethic going on, these guys. They're making a ton of noise on behalf of their teammates as they're playing in this great big glass squash court that's in front of me, so you can see through it on 2 different sites. So that's what's going on right now. Earlier today, a great result in women's hockey for Team NT, so they are now 2 games deep into the women's hockey tournament. The first one they lost to PEI, but they defeated Newfoundland and Labrador 4-1 earlier this afternoon, which is an excellent result. They're in a pool with PEI, Newfoundland and Yukon. Yukon is the one game remaining in that pool. That is Tuesday at 12:30. To give you an idea of what we've seen from Yukon so far, they lost 15-1 in their opening game, and they lost 12-1 in their second game. So looking at the form book, you would hope that Team NT would be in with a chance of winning that one on Tuesday at 12:30. And then from there, you go on into the placement games and the rest of the competition. So that's a really solid result for the women's hockey team a little bit earlier on today. Also today, another really good performance was Casey Tai in badminton. Now, Casey is the only member of Team NT's badminton team. He's from Paulatuck. He's come all the way down here, and if he'd lost his first game here, he would have been out of the Canada Games about 7 minutes after starting. So a lot of pressure on him to win his first game. He did that. He beat his opponent from Yukon, then he beat an opponent from Nunavut, and eventually was only dumped out of the competition by a particularly strong former national junior bronze medalist from Ontario. So a really strong performance for Casey Ty from Paulatuck. In fact, let's have a little listen to my interview with him. I spoke to him a little bit earlier on today after his first game against the Yukon, which he won. And you'll learn from this that not only is he the only player for Team NT, he's also going to try and take part in the team event, despite only being one human being. Have a listen.
My name's Casey Ty. I'm from Paulatuck, Northwest Territories, and I'm coming down here for the Canada Winter Games, badminton.
First of all, let's explain, how big is the badminton team for Team NT at this year's Canada Games?
Well, it's me. Me, myself, and I. So,
okay, you are the only member of Team NT.
Yeah.
Okay, now you went out, you've already played this morning. How'd it go?
I did pretty well. I won my first round, so I'm moving on to the next one in about an hour.
And basically, you've got to keep winning to stay in it, right?
Yeah, once you're out, you're out.
You've come all this way. You're the only member of Team NT playing this sport. And once you're out, you're out. And it takes, 10, 15 minutes to play each match?
Yeah, it's crazy how fast you can get out.
But there is the team event as well, right?
Yes, there is. Thing is, the team event's supposed to be, there's supposed to be a team. But I'm doing it for experience right now because it's kind of impossible to win it.
So what's going to happen in the team event is they're going to keep sending out different athletes. And you're just going to keep going back out?
I'm just going to keep going against their team, yeah. It's gonna be an experience. It's going to be fun, yeah.
How hard has it been, training for this? You live in Paulatuck.
It's crazy. It's tough to train, yeah. I've moved down to BC once in a while to train, but, yeah, Paulatuck, it's my brother and I practice. And, yeah, that's, really the competition there.
But it must be cool to be able to come and represent the community and be an ambassador, right?
Yeah, it's great just to come out for Paulatuck, yeah.
What are you hoping for out of this? You went 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It didn't go so well then. You were only young. This is a U23 event, and you were, 14 then, right? Yeah. You're still young for it now. What do you want to get out of this week?
Oh, I'm just to play some great games against the people across Canada. It's just a great experience. And to win. Of course. That's everyone's goal.
That was Casey Ty, our lone badminton player on Team NT, speaking to me a little bit earlier on. Also today we had cross-country skiing. The opening races at the River Bend Cross-Country Park have finished. For Team NT, the top male finisher was Nico Bennett, who was around about 26th, and Claire Littlefair was 20th. She was the top female finisher for Team NT. There are more races throughout the week. We also have archery and judo taking place this week. They don't start until tomorrow. The name Wilson Elliott is the one you want to listen out for when it comes to judo for Team NT. He has a real opportunity of a medal. Scott, I know you've spoken to him on the show before. He is ranked something in the 30s in the world at junior level in judo, and it's very rare that Team NT comes into a competition like this with an athlete of that caliber. So we're expecting to see good things from Wilson. Of course, the main thing is that he has a competition that he enjoys and performs as well as he can, but there is, I think, a hint of hopefulness around Team NT that he can do something really special this week. His competition starts on Tuesday. The other one to mention is figure skating, and that takes place this evening. Again, Team NT has one competitor in that. That's Victoria Ham. She competes at 6 o'clock tonight in the pre-novice ladies singles short program, and she'll be back a little bit later on this week as well. I should mention curling. The curling started yesterday here at Red Deer in the same arena that Jamie Curry and friends were in not so long ago when they were competing in the Travelers Club Championship. So Team NT's girls and boys are both, I think they've had 4 matches each so far. It was a relatively tough day yesterday, particularly for the boys team. They had one of their team have to leave the rink ill midway through their opening game. So obviously we wish them all the best and we hope they get well, but they are already well into the curling contest as well. So it's a busy week. There's something like 8 or 9 different teams and sports in action this week when we only had 5 last week. And you can catch up with the latest by following Team NT on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Or you can always check out Cabin Radio as well, and we'll bring you all the most important stuff.
The CSR Podcast.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Continuing with our NHL Trade Deadline recap and reaction. We talked about the Winnipeg Jets, a couple moves that they made. Ottawa Senators, the biggest sellers at the trade deadline and arguably the busiest team over the past couple days. Elsewhere, talk about the rest of the Canadian teams, I guess, first. Toronto Maple Leafs. There wasn't a whole lot going on.
You didn't miss much.
No, you didn't. You didn't miss too much for a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. I think people were expecting something.
Yeah, something. I think we know they shot their shot.
Yes.
A month ago, or however long ago it was when they acquired Jake Muzzin.
Yeah, a few weeks ago now. Yeah, they acquired Jake Muzzin. Great trade. Everyone was pretty much on the same page on that one. Good move, but I feel like there was a pretty consensus thought that they needed to make one more move. They needed one more piece, whether it was another gritty depth defenseman.
Right-handed shot.
Yeah, right-handed shot. That's been a lot of the talk, and a lot of thought that they could use one more piece up front. A Wayne Simmons, would have looked really nice in a Toronto Maple Leafs
Mississauga
jersey.
native.
Yes, exactly.
But he's a guy who can score, 30 goals a year. He's eclipsed the 30-goal plateau, I believe, 6 times in his career.
He brings everything that you don't have on the Toronto Maple Leafs. That being grit, toughness, in your face style of play, and improves even more so on the depth scoring. There's a sense, again, in my conversation with Jay Bear before the show, there is a sense that a lot of teams were maybe turning the screws a little bit to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I think it may be a case where you're dealing with a young rookie general manager, and you're thinking, maybe we can try and, push a little harder with this guy, see how badly he wants to make a move here. If he's willing to just give up the kitchen sink to do it, to make a name, make a headline, or is he okay with just standing pat? Kyle Dubas has made his decision. And the Leafs are going to have to kind of live with this moving forward this year. And the reason it seems like such a crucial thing is because this was seen as a potential all-in year for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We've talked a lot, and you've heard ad nauseum about the contract situation at the end of the year. They got Austin Matthews re-signed, but to obviously a huge amount of money. Mitch Marner is going to be the next one. He is going to get paid handsomely. And then the depth situation, the cap starts to get a little bit tight. And you're not sure if there's going to be some of these depth guys that have been very important pieces to the team this year and have helped make them as good a team as they are, that you're going to potentially lose for nothing now. And then maybe that window's not there anymore.
Right. Dubas did make clear ahead of the deadline, both Sandin and Liljegren, their 2 most sought-after prospects, were not on the table in the event of trading for a rental. So we figured Toronto wasn't really in the rental market. But at the same time, even if we're talking terms, they can't really take on a whole lot right now when you've got 2 guys, 3 really, when you include the Nylander contract, eating up a significant portion of your cap. And then you've got a 4th guy who could himself make close to $10 million a season in Mitch Marner come the end of the season. But those depth guys you're talking about, the Andreas Johnson, Kasperi Kapanen, Connor Brown, Jake Gardner, it's a realistic possibility 3 out of 4. All of them aren't on the roster next year. So he's betting on skill and speed, which the Leafs certainly have. But can they make up for their lack of size, lack of grit when playoff hockey comes around come April, May? It's looking right now like they're destined for a first-round matchup against the Boston Bruins, a team that's had their number even in this regular season. Is that enough to get them past? We will see.
And isn't that the scariest thing of all? That it's looking, still 20 games out, but it's looking inevitable almost that the Leafs are going to face the Boston Bruins in a first-round matchup. Whether or not the Leafs finish with home ice advantage or the Bruins finish with home ice advantage, it looks like they are going to face each other in the first round. And as a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, I'm not too big on that.
Nope.
Not a big fan. The Bruins, as opposed to the Toronto Maple Leafs, did make a couple deals with some significance. They brought over Charlie Coyle late last week from the Minnesota Wild, which adds, a bit of size and a bit of grit to a team that's already big and gritty, and a bit of scoring depth. And then they added Marcus Johansson, who is a guy who has the skill to be a top 6 player, in my opinion, has the skill to be a top 6 player on most NHL clubs. The Bruins, I don't even know. He might be a third line center. They might slot him in on the fourth line because they're that deep, and as they get healthier and healthier, they haven't even been playing at 100% health. I don't even think there's too many games this year where they've actually had their full roster all dressed at the same time. Patrice Bergeron's been out at various times. They've had, various other significant
Chara
injuries.
missed some time. Pasternak out for weeks now. So when they get everyone back into the fold, you talked about their depth and their grit and their size. They also probably have the best line in all of hockey when you're talking about what they can do on the offensive side of the puck, but also what they give back to you on the defensive side in Pasternak, Marchand, and Bergeron. So not an ideal first-round matchup really for anyone, but certainly for the Leafs, a young team against another team that's really had their number. Yeah,
like you say, there's obviously the history there that the Bruins, we always like to say that season series means nothing heading into the playoffs, but it means something.
It does.
There is a psychological edge that the Bruins will have going into this inevitable first-round series. And the fact that they have that and then have improved on their team.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not confident.
No.
I'll put it that way.
Try to get hot down the stretch so there is a Game 7. You can at least have it in your barn. But yeah, not an ideal first-round matchup for really any team outside of Tampa Bay, I think, in the Eastern Conference, who is just laughably running away, not even with the East. They are 17 points up on the next closest team in the East. Really only Calgary is within striking distance, if you want to call 13 points striking distance.
Elsewhere, as far as Canadian teams goes, that was pretty much it. Calgary, I think, made maybe one
move, I think, for maybe their third pairing.
Yeah, so they didn't do a whole lot there. And I mean, I think
they didn't have to.
If I'm the Calgary Flames, I think I'm pretty happy with what I've got, and I'm pretty satisfied to stand pat. So they didn't make any drastic moves there. Edmonton Oilers, obviously not going to be a playoff team this year.
No.
What do you think about Edmonton Oilers fans, though? You got to be a little bit frustrated now with, this team was not going anywhere. This whole season is a bust. There's more than a few parts that you could potentially shop around, unless teams were basically calling the Oilers, being like, "We don't want to talk to you."
Yeah,
nothing.
No.
Why would they not make any moves?
It's funny when you look at all the panels, all the pundits, all the analysts come out and they break down the real winners and the real losers. The team that comes away with the biggest fish will usually be labeled a winner. Teams like Columbus that make a lot of plays that will make their team better will be labeled winners. Oftentimes, even teams that give up a lot, like we talked about Ottawa, it would be unfair to put them in the loser category just outright. We knew this was going to happen.
I don't know if you can call them a winner, but not
they
clear
got some
losers.
Parts back. Then there are the teams that you figure are going to make plays that will just inevitably get labeled losers because they didn't make a play when they should have. I don't think anyone was really expecting Edmonton to do anything, but I did see that some people had them labeled as losers. We were just looking at how disgustingly top heavy they are, with almost all of their production coming from Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and you can even throw Nuge in there. But then it just becomes a matter of if you were going to start to strip for parts, they got some bad contracts. We talked about the Milan Lucic $6 million cap hit for another 5 seasons until he hits unrestricted free agency. I'd be curious to know if phone calls were even made. I can't even hazard a guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's much you can do with that contract. That's just you're handcuffed. I don't know what the buyout situation in the future is with Milan Lucic, but
you figure we're probably heading down that road. Because that's
they have to be.
another 5 years of that.
I mean, nobody's going to trade for that contract, but
No.
It's just got another year of frustration
Yeah.
for Edmonton Oilers fans. Oh, man. And I mean, especially even when you look further west to Vancouver and you're like, these guys, nobody expected anything from. They're having such a nice, surprising, flattering season. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks are not going to be in the playoffs.
No.
They're making a strong case for themselves for possibly a last wild card spot.
Yeah.
Chances are they're going to fall short because they just don't quite have the roster to do it. They've really gone cold in their last 10 games have not necessarily been very pretty too, so they haven't helped themselves in that way. But still, the fact that they're there, they're still 2 points ahead of the Edmonton Oilers, a team that was close to going to the Western Conference Final 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you wonder what happened since then. This team is not that different.
No, we were talking about that off air as well. Windows of contention, how quickly things can change. 2 years ago, it was the Senators. One game away in Game 7 against the Pittsburgh Penguins for a chance to play for the Cup. Same with the Oilers, right? They had that exciting series. They beat the Sharks. Up next against another divisional foe, and the Anaheim Ducks, I believe, dropped that series in 6. But you're thinking, all right.
Yeah.
This is it. This is what we can come to expect
there was
for years to come.
No reason for anything but optimism at that point. And now, just back in the dumps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Elsewhere, NHL Trade Deadline. You know what? Actually, we'll take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll wrap up the rest of the trade deadline. And then we'll talk about Jeff O'Neill. Doesn't give an F.
You're listening to Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Truly do hope you've enjoyed this all-hockey episode of Cabin Sports Radio. There was just too much to talk about.
Yeah.
Like we say, sometimes the trade deadline, there's nothing to talk about. But when there is stuff to talk about, it's really fun to talk about. So here we are, finishing out an entire hour that has just flown by, wrapping up the NHL trade deadline. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Columbus, the big winners, picking up Matt Duchene, Ryan Zingle, Adam McQuaid, a couple other pieces, Jeff Kincaid in goal.
Yeah.
A few more pieces, too. One we haven't even talked about is the Nashville Predators, who did win the Wayne Simmons sweepstakes.
That's right.
Gave up a decent amount to get him, Ryan Hartman being one of the big pieces going elsewhere. And I think that was kind of indicative as to why the Toronto Maple Leafs didn't pull the trigger on that deal. Because Ryan Hartman, if that trade is with the Leafs, is probably Kasperi Kapanen.
Yeah.
And I don't think they were willing to give up Kasperi Kapanen. And you know what? I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Much as I would have loved to see Wayne Simmons in a Leafs uniform, I think he's a guy that you got to keep around.
Yeah. And clearly would be a rental. Simmons' contract is up at the end of the season. Unlike Mikael Granlund, the second big acquisition. I really like both of those additions for the Nashville Predators. We broke down the
size and skill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
seriously. Penalty killer, almost a point per game guy. They were I saw the term fleeced used once today.
Okay.
People are saying that the general manager of the Nashville Predators, David Poile, fleeced the Minnesota Wild in that trade, because it was a 1-for-1. Kevin Fiala for Mikael Granlund.
Fiala's a decent player. He's been a pretty usable player for the Nashville Predators. But I think Granlund adds a little more skill, a little more slickness, a little more smoothness to the Nashville line. And that's probably what they were looking for. They got a lot of grit. They do have a lot of skill on that team, but I think they were maybe looking for a little bit more speed, so you're not so heavily relying on a guy like Philippe Forsberg to take on that role. Adam with a few more pieces that are similar type players. And man, the Nashville Predators are looking scary once again.
They will be very good.
Yeah. Elsewhere, as you mentioned, the Dallas Stars picked up Matt Zuccarello. That was also late last week. I think he scored 2 goals in his debut and then shattered his arm.
He's out 4 weeks now.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunate.
Tough blow for the Dallas Stars. And there were a few other moves, too. that I feel like we are missing.
San Jose, Gustav Nyquist.
Yes.
That's a nice addition for them.
And I wanted to, and yes, I'm glad you remember that because I wanted to mention the Detroit Red Wings too, as, ones who were obviously, same as the Ottawa Senators, big sellers at the trade deadline. We all knew they would be. Detroit Red Wings are in a major rebuilding phase of that franchise's existence. But did not too bad. Yes, shipped off the Gustav Nyquist to the San Jose Sharks. And also Nick Jensen to the Washington Capitals. But in exchange, picked up Madison Bowie from the Washington Capitals, 2 second-round draft picks, and a third-rounder. Not bad. Not bad. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to load up the cupboard with draft picks and got a nice young prospect in Madison Bowie, who I think has got a really high top end. If he can, it's kind of the same as Anthony Duclair, who's now with the Ottawa Senators. If he can find that potential, I think they may have a really, really nice pickup on their hands. So that will about do it. That is enough NHL trade deadline talk. If you caught Trade Center today on TSN, of course, they were talking about it all day. And they happened to feature a very special guest. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on the show. That's right. Talking about his beloved Montreal Canadiens and all things NHL trade deadline. And then Jeff O'Neill decided to, hijack the interview a bit. So we will leave that with you, your extra audio here on Cabin Sports Radio, and we will talk to you next Monday right here on Cabin Radio.
You're by far the most powerful man on the show today, although ODOG likes to think he is. So one last question. Is there anything the government of Canada can do to end the quarter-century Stanley Cup drought for Canadian teams?
Well, I am very much focused on making sure that the drought ends with the same team that started it all. The last team to win were the Habs. I remember being a Whitewater River guide in the spring of '93 when we were celebrating that victory, and I'd love to be able to celebrate another Stanley Cup victory by the Habs today as Prime Minister.
And Jeff O'Neill walks right in front of the shot as we're interviewing the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining us today. Get back to the more important things of running the nation.
Oh, no, this is an important day, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Okay, thank you. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau here on Trade Center.
See the big difference in NAFTA.
Does he even know what's going on the show?
You know this is TV. There's cameras and all that.
Get a drink, fellas.
I mean...
Man,
I'm not doing a phoner with Jordan Wheel. It is...
Buddy, you're the host. You got to know how to adapt. Who cares if I walk in front of the screen?